Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Malcolm X was born on May the 19th, 1925. I wanted to think about his legacy, just given my heritage. His birthday still, unfortunately, forces America to look at one of its deepest historical wounds. His life exposed the national habit that we speak eloquently about liberty, but unfortunately, the era in which he spoke was an injustice that should never have happened. Although, that being said, the more grievous injustice of today is factually abortion. The civil rights movement was right when it insisted that every human person possesses a dignity prior to the state. The state may recognize that dignity through law, but it cannot create that dignity by means of its force or legislation. That's the anthropological center of the matter of the human person. Man is made in the image of God. Any categorization, skin color, ancestry, what have you, none of that matters. The church has already said this. Modern politics borrows from Catholic sentiment without attributing the full Catholic image and context. For example, the Second Vatican Council taught every type of discrimination must be overcome because it violates God's design for the human person. This is Gaudium et Spes 29. Consequently, the civil rights movement's greatest achievement was its insistence that the law must stop treating created persons as civic inequalities, because the color of a man's skin doesn't really define the substance of their character and capacity, the moral reality of their soul. Malcolm X entered that struggle through a tremendous amount of anger, and his anger had real historical causes, I can acknowledge that. The segregation he was facing was a public regime of insult with police power. He saw what respectable America wanted hidden beneath things like committee language. And so he named the condition the ballot or the bullet. Black Americans were victims of Americanism, not beneficiaries of its promises. Now, I want to be clear here that there has to be a very sound biblical take to all this, which we'll draw to. But Malcolm X's evaluation is crucial because he understood that a nation can praise freedom while allowing whole neighborhoods to be suspicious of the language of that freedom. But his early worldview was deeply flawed. The Nation of Islam gave him, unfortunately, more anger than was necessary. It gave him a racial theology. And that theology will never heal a wounded nation. His denunciation of what he called white America often moved beyond moral indictment into a spiritual poison. That's one of those impressive achievements. Hatred gets baptized, and then, unfortunately, the person who perpetrates it risks being governed by that hatred. But to be sure, Malcolm is remembered as one of the greater proponents of the civil rights movement. He refused to freeze his mind at the stage that first rescued him from destruction. As Manning Marable argues in Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention, Malcolm's public identity was remade. He endured conflict, but he studied. He had some betrayal, he underwent pilgrimage, and he reconsidered his moral positions. The man who once preached racial separation later returned from Mecca with an imagination that wanted more of a concept of brotherhood. In the autobiography of Malcolm X, he described seeing Muslims of many complexions joined together in prayer, and he wrote that the experience forced him to rearrange much of my thought patterns. Now, that sentence, in some sense, is the beginning of a practical wisdom. Malcolm's mature insight, or his insightful maturity, I should say, came through the painful recognition that his racial hatred was itself an injustice, that he could expose the injustices of society at the time, but also provide an architecture for real reconciliation without perpetrating a reverse racism. Now, he stayed fierce. His rhetoric remained fierce. He was still suspicious of what he called American self-congratulation. But his later words had a bit more gentleness, a universal range. He began to speak of human rights, not racial revenge. And that's why the civil rights movement can be looked at from a particular perspective. Martin Luther King, he expressed the moral urgency of that struggle as well. His letter from Birmingham jail, he wrote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." The moral order cannot be suspended locally. We either have a ubiquitous application of the moral principle, or, frankly, the nation itself gets corrupted by injustice. So that movement gave America the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, wider educational opportunity. I can go on and on. But it also gave a legal culture for where a black Asian immigrant, like myself, could marry my Caucasian Midwestern bride without duress of law or the contempt of public authority. That's no small thing. And so I am grateful for that heritage. But at the same time, I want to draw this to a Catholic perspective, because I'm not a black Asian immigrant first, neither is my bride a Caucasian Midwestern woman first. We are both Catholics, children of God. That is who we are, that is what we do, that is the beginning and end of our identity. If we are truly Catholics reading the entirety of the Civil Rights era, we have to jettison any sentimental historical read. Good causes very often throughout history attract bad philosophies and wounded people. And those people can be tempted to embrace any weapon in the cause of their victory. Some activists drew upon Marxist categories. These reduce human persons to class conflict or power location and revolutionary usefulness. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels wrote in the Communist Manifesto, "The history of all hitherto thinking, existing society is the history of class struggle." That claim is seductive and drove a lot of civil rights rhetoric. The church rejects that reduction because we're not economic units. We're also not racial units. We're not revolutionary instruments. We are children of God, period. Pius XI stated the matter bluntly in Quadragesimo Anno. He wrote, "Religious socialism, Christian socialism are contradictory terms. Any theory that's built upon materialist conflict is not in communion with God's worldview. It has no place in it." So the civil rights movement attempted to get the person right, but only whenever it appealed to the biblical vision of the human person. Things like human dignity, natural law, moral equality. But it went wrong whenever it allowed liberation to become racial resentment and, to program it. Whenever it exchanged the biblical vision of reconciled persons for the revolutionary habit of right now what we're seeing, permanent accusation of those who are quote-unquote descendant of slave owners. We have to be careful here. The entire intent behind the movement was supposed to be equality for all, not a reverse racism so that we can perpetrate the ills that were done generations ago by people who are not even alive right now. Malcolm X is an important individual, but he's also a warning. We cannot be complacent to injustice, but we cannot give ourselves to ideological captivity. He was right to condemn cowardly moderation, but he was wrong whenever his rhetoric made racial vitriol his morality. He was right to demand responsibility in the social sphere, but he was wrong, especially in his earlier worldview, when he treated brotherhood as something that could only be limited by your blood ancestry in a particular race. In the autobiography of Malcolm X, he said, "I am for truth no matter who tells it. I'm for justice no matter who it is for or against." That ought to be our principle in a grander scale with God. Because even in his earlier instincts, Malcolm eventually realized that he needed to move closer to the moral grammar of the Catholic Church. The Church has led the world most faithfully. She's taught that every human person receives dignity from creation and redemption, and so race, empire, class, none of these things matter in terms of human dignity. The history has always done right when she obeys the Catholic Church. History has always done wrong when she deviates from the Catholic Church. And we've seen that time and time again. And so for Catholics, the final answer for building a civilization of love is not racial romanticism or racist cynicism. The final answer is that we are made in the image and likeness of God. This is the Catholic worldview. We honor what was rightly achieved, we critique what deviates from Christ's image, and more than anything, we stand true for what the Church teaches is true justice. Stay tuned, I'm Marcus Peter.